Hello, everybody, and welcome on the Commerce Show. Today, I'm very excited to present to you this podcast with Richard Cohene from Busbud. I actually met Richard a few years ago. I think it was in 2019 or something like that. And when we met, it was at Journée eCommerce when he gave a keynote, actually the closing keynote of the day. And I did enjoy a lot the content he gave during his keynote. So I decided for you, all our listeners, to invite him over the podcast to hear more about his new challenge at Busbud. Busbud is a leader into the bus ticket industry, so it's a marketplace for travelers. They merge, I think, over 4 millions of bus roads on the same platform. That's pretty interesting. Outside of that, Richard had several experience in the past. So starting at eBay as a Powerseller, then he moved to Beyond the Rack, a successful startup from Montreal in the retail and flash sale industry. Then he moved to a small company called Facebook. I don't know if you heard of. Kidding. And then he joined Groupe Dynamite in French, which is one of the largest retail chain in Canada, to be the CMO for over a year. And now he's the CMO of Busbud. Busbud just recently raised 15 million into capital for their Series C. So we're addressing that. We're going to be talking about e-commerce marketing, of course, marketplace marketing and strategy, cohort management into the media buying process. He's explaining us what mistake he did in the past, underestimating maybe the importance of the data of the users and also the let's say the conversion window and the opportunities around the data from Facebook advertising, Google advertising, and everything. It was very, very interesting, to be honest. One of my best podcasts so far. We have over 55 minutes of great content, so enjoy. Let us know in the comments if you have any feedbacks or questions for Richard. He's going to be open to answer all those questions. Thank you, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe on Facebook, on Spotify, on YouTube. I really enjoy reading your comment and getting feedbacks from you guys. Thank you so much. The podcast starts right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome on the Commerce Show. Today, as I said earlier, I'm with Richard Cohene from Busbud. Hello, Richard.
Hello, Philip.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing really great. It's always a weird question to ask during this pandemic, huh?
I think, you got to do the best you can these days, so try to stay positive.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Richard, let's deep dive right now into the questions. From VP marketing to C-level marketing exec position, I think I can say you have one of the an impressive track record in the industry. Can you tell us a little bit more about your professional background and maybe highlight some great achievement since the beginning of your career?
So maybe I'll just do a little correction. It was marketing coordinator to C-level. So when I started at Beyond the Rack, when we were 13 employees, I was the marketing coordinator.
Sorry for that.
It's okay. So it definitely started from the bottom, and did all the things that you got to do to learn all the tricks to be successful on whether it's analytics, Facebook platform, AdWords platform, cold calling people, doing all the hard work.
Oh, yeah.
I've been there, so yeah. I think if the question is like, something that happened along the way that I'm proud of. I'd say,
Yep.
tons of things along the way, but the learning process, I think, is the piece that I'm the most proud of, because it just never stops happening. Whether you're starting out a new job and you're new in your career and you're fresh out of school and becoming the marketing coordinator at a startup that has 13 people, or you're trying to grow in your business from a manager to a director or vice president and a C-level and so on, or you're going to get another job at a bigger or smaller company. I think the learning process is the piece I'm the most proud of. So I couldn't really think of one like marketing campaign or one thing that was worth chatting about. Unless you want to probe more, I could try to think of one, but.
Yeah, but if we just say like you've started, I guess, by yourself on eBay, and then you
Yeah.
moved to marketing coordinator at Beyond the Rack, and then you've been at Facebook for a few years as a Canadian retail and e-commerce manager, and then you moved to Dynamite, and now you're at Busbud. So are there any things? Okay, let's talk about your eBay career, because it's the beginning, and I started also back in the days on eBay, so that part
Nice.
is one, that's a part that is interesting. And I do remember last time we had a beer together, you told me that you were still into marketplaces, like in terms of interest, you're still looking to develop your knowledge in the marketplaces.
Yeah.
So you started on eBay your e-commerce career in 2002. Are you missing those days? And how was it to do e-commerce on marketplaces back in 2002 for listeners?
I think I absolutely miss those days. I cherish those days. They were days when I would wake up at 7 in the morning. This was pre-smartphones, and I would lift open the laptop and see how much did we sell last night between when I went to sleep and woke up, and then I would just attack the packaging and shipping and prepare all the parcels in the basement of my mother's house at the time, and
Wow.
prepare every one of those orders, and the Canada Post truck would come to the house and pick them up, and it was amazing. It was a super fun time. I did that for about 5 years, and I'll never.
What were you selling? What were you selling at that time?
So the first stuff that I started to sell, and I always love this story because in hindsight, it's just I think it's great. So I'll tell it to you. I'll try to make it fast. I went to a sample sale for Burton snowboards, and they were selling pants and jackets and all kinds of stuff. And I bought a jacket. Okay. I'm a big snowboarder. I've been snowboarding for 28 years now. I went in there, I bought a jacket, and it was a Burton AK2L LZ down jacket, color burgundy, size large. And I paid $235 Canadian for it. And I brought it home. And my girlfriend at the time, now wife, said, "That's too big. You're a medium." But the sample size was large, and that's all they would sell. But clearly I'm a medium. And I said, happy wife, happy life. So I had to get rid of it. I didn't know what to do. So I listed it on eBay. It was the very first thing I ever sold on eBay. And at the time I had a job working at Sports Experts, nights and weekends through school to make, $8 or $10 an hour. And I sold this jacket on eBay, and it sold for, I think, $450 US. And at the time the exchange rate was 30%. So or 25, some big number. And then after
good margin.
Sorry?
Pretty good margin. That's cool.
Yeah, it was good margin. So I think I ended up netting like 200 Canadian dollars, after all the fees and everything on this one item, which was basically how much I would make after working an entire weekend, 20 hours at Sports Expert. So I went back to the guy who ran the shop, and I said, "Do you mind if I buy a little more stuff from you?" And he said, "Yeah, whatever you want." And I bought, at the time, I put my whole life savings into it. I bought $5,000 worth of snowboard stuff from him, and I brought it all home in my van. and I sold it on, I went to work and I sold it on eBay for the next 2 weeks. I hustled like a maniac, and I turned 5,000 into 10,000 in about 2 weeks or something like that. I went back to the guy and I said, we got to do a bigger deal. And before I went into his office, I took the 10,000 that I had made in total off that initial buy, and I deposited it all onto my Visa card. And my Visa card had a limit of $20,000 at the time. That was the Visa credit limit, and I added 10,000 to it. So in theory, I had a $30,000 spending limit.
That's a pretty good margin.
Yeah, on that one one transaction, I could do that. So I went into his office and I said, "Hey, I'd like to buy more." And I said, "How much do you have?" He said, "I got about $40,000 worth of stuff." And I said, "I don't have 40,000. I'll give you 20,000." And he said, "That's not enough money. I can't do it for 20,000." And I remember I was wearing a jogging pants and a hoodie, and I just stuck my hand out to him and I said, "Well, let's meet in the middle like gentlemen." And the guy looked at me sideways, and he stuck his hand out and he shook my hand. And we made a deal. So I just bought $30,000 worth of stuff, which is every cent I had and all the room on my Visa card at the time. I rented a U-Haul truck. I filled my truck up with like so many boxes, incorporated a company, got my GST, PSD numbers, got insurance on the product, put it in my basement, and I started working night and day and night, weekends like crazy. My girlfriend was modeling the clothes, I was taking the pictures of her, and we did it for 3 months. Wow. And I turned $30,000 into $60,000. And at that point, I was hooked. And I went for the next 5 years on like a tyrant. I would go to everybody who sold anything, and I tried to get their stuff and sell it on eBay. And I had a wonderful time doing that.
Yeah, and I think you became like a Powerseller for what I saw. What was that status?
At the time you could become an eBay Powerseller, which means you had a certain status of dollars earned in a time period, positive feedback from your customers, and a few other metrics. I forgot them all, but I was always trying to get 100% of all of them, because eBay would actually give you a discount on your seller fees if you performed at that high bar. So like I would, instead of paying eBay 15% commission or something, you'd pay them 10 or 12 if you did a really good job. So Powerseller wasn't just, oh, you do a lot of dollars. It was, you're actually really good at servicing the customer. So I immediately began to value truly the customer feedback and the feedback loop. And I would, start putting marketing messaging into my packages that was like, if you have any issues, contact me on this number. And like
package insert, that's a good strategy. Yeah.
Skype was a thing back then, and I was like taking Skype calls from people all over the world and like translating copy from like English into Mandarin so that I could help resolve someone's issue in like another country or whatever, because I just didn't want to get any negative feedback. I did everything to avoid, a negative.
Wow. Yeah, I guess checking all those boxes for eBay was to make sure for them that you would provide a good, customer service experience and all that stuff. So that's pretty cool. Wow, that's very impressive in terms of your beginning and career. I think you learned by yourself at the beginning, and then you move forward into different organizations. So you were already in the fashion, or in the wear and the outwear actually, and I guess that maybe led to your interest for Beyond the Rack after.
That's exactly how it happened. So I was at a trade show called the Coterie in New York, and I was trying to buy clothing to sell on eBay. And one of the brands that I was trying to get their merchandise for said to me, "Oh, you're just like Gilt Group." And at the time, I didn't know what Gilt Group was, but it was the American competitor for Beyond the Rack, basically a membership-based online shopping club. And this brand gave me the Gilt Group's merchandising buyers sales pitch material. And I brought it home with me, and at the end of the trade show, you read all your literature. And I read about this company called Gilt Group, and that there were 2 women founders who started this cool business. One of the women came from Louis Vuitton, and the other was the director of marketing for eBay. And I was like, whoa, you left eBay to go to Guilt Group? Like, this is my life. And like, you worked there and you left and you went to Guilt Group. So then I became super intrigued about this business model. Like, why would someone make this career jump? And I found out about this startup called Beyond the Rack at the time, which had like 12 or 13 staff. I got an introduction to the CEO and the COO at the time. And we hit it off, and I started working there and doing my eBay business nights and weekends, but wanting to be a part of this, potentially really great startup.
Yeah, so as you said, you were one of the first 10 or 13 employee at Beyond the Rack, and I know you were really involved into the e-commerce marketing. So what has been one of the biggest home runs you did when you were there? And maybe for a listener that don't know actually what was Beyond the Rack, and I don't know actually if it's still online, but can you just explain more the concept? Because when I saw that first, I was like, wow, this is a new emerging e-commerce type of business, and it was very interesting. So can you just tell us a little bit more about it and what type of home run you did when you were there?
Sure. The business model was essentially a membership-based online shopping club, which means the user had to sign up for the website, which was free. But in the sign-up process, the business collected your email address. And then once you signed up, you would be able to see what was for sale on the website. And the merchandise that we sold was essentially designer brands at a discount through a flash sales model, which means that every day the inventory changes on the website about 50%. And every 2 days it changes 100%. So we would send the user an email daily telling them what is new and on sale on this website today. And they would open the email, they would see, oh, they have XYZ brands, that's interesting to me, and they would click through and potentially buy, or they would open the email, see something that wasn't interesting for them, they wouldn't buy that day. And we would essentially send users a daily email with an update on the new inventory that we're selling and promoting for that day. So the conversion funnel was really a two-step process. It was one, get a lead to subscribe to the newsletter, and then two, get that lead to buy something on the website either that day or on a later date, and track that sort of, CAC to LTV ratio in terms of your cohorts and your payback periods to define a successful marketing strategy, and then go back upper funnel and then double down on those rich veins of data, those great acquisition channels, and trim down on the lower ones. So that was sort of the business model / marketing strategy, if you will, in a nutshell. And if you say like,
really interesting,
what was some of the wins? I mean, there was a ton of wins that we had there, from strategic partnerships with companies like Daily Candy or Hearst Digital Media to, unlocking the power of Facebook and Google to be able to drive just an infinite amount of volume and traffic. And when I first got there, that was my main job. The CEO said to me, Rich, I need you to figure out how to use AdWords and use Google and Facebook. And at the time, I actually didn't know what that meant. I had zero experience running AdWords campaigns and zero experience running Facebook campaigns.
Of course, because on eBay, that's not a strategy at that time that you were using.
You don't need it.
It does make
eBay
sense.
drives its own traffic. So demand generation was new to me in 2009. But I got down to business. I opened up the accounts for both Facebook and Google. I started to figure out, okay, what assets do I need to create an ad? How do I put these pixels on the site so I can track things? Who am I going to target to get things done? And then look in the database and see like that UTM parameter or that invite code, equaled X amount of users that became buyers, and like tried to do the whole marketing funnel on my dashboard. And I at the time, Facebook wasn't heavily used, and it was pretty straightforward on how to do it, like age, gender, geographic locations, interests. Like lookalike models didn't exist back then, it was pretty simple. But I started to spend some money. I actually put my own credit card into the Facebook platform and started using it to pay for the Facebook advertising. And I ended up using my whole life savings actually that I had made over like 5 years on eBay. I had put it onto my credit card to pay for the bills for Facebook and Google. I didn't really think anything of it. And then at the end of the month, I submitted my expense report to the accountant, the controller at the time.
Yeah.
And it was like a stack of papers this high with like a Visa bill on top. I'm like, here, I spent like $100,000 last month. And he was like, what?
What?
And the CEO was so cool. He didn't say anything to me. He waited like 2 weeks. So they paid me back. They filed the expense for it and paid me back. And then he came to me one day. He's like, Richard, did you use your own credit card to pay for all of our advertising last month? And I was like, yeah, it really worked, right? Like, look how many leads we're getting. The business is really taking off. He's like, yeah, but you don't have to do that. You could use my credit card, or we could get a company card, and you could use yours later. I'm like, okay. And then we started to put it on their credit cards, and it was funny because everyone's credit card only had like a $20-something thousand limit. So when their credit would just expire, it would default to the second card and the third card. But I was like, I just put my whole life savings onto my credit card, so my limit was like $100,000. Anyway, it was a funny story. But in terms of successes, I mean, all those were huge. Wow. And I think if there was one that really stuck with me as one of my favorites, it was PayPal.
Okay.
PayPal was amazing because I loved PayPal because I came from eBay, right? PayPal and eBay were like one and the same. Like, I forgot which one bought the other one. But PayPal was how I made all my money for the last 5 years. And I was like, we need PayPal on Beyond the Rack. And everyone's like, we can't get them because they don't want to do business with us. And I'm like, okay, I will die before we lose the PayPal deal. And I attacked. I found all the executives. I emailed everybody that there was, whoever worked at PayPal. And it took 2 years of negotiating and pushing back with this wonderful woman, Jolie. If she ever hears this podcast, she will definitely remember me. And it took 2 years of negotiating. And I vividly remember the phone call where she said, okay, Rich, we're going to do it at I think it was 2.1% processing and 10 cents per transaction. But along with it, this was what I wanted the whole time. I wanted an email that came from PayPal to go out to all of PayPal's database that said Beyond the Rack is now accepting PayPal. And when she called me and she said, okay, we're going to do the email this rate, I just knew the deal in my head. And I was like, okay, we got a deal. And it was 2 years of negotiating just wrapped up in 2 sentences when it was clinched. And the onboarding integration was amazing. Their team was the most scientific squad I've ever seen. And then we did the engineering deploy, and then they sent out an email to their database basically. I think it was the same day or 1 day later. And PayPal went from having 0% of our sales to being 35% of our sales in 1 day.
Wow.
And
insane.
And we got more people who were part of the Beyond the Rack database who had never bought from us before to become buyers for the first time on that day than any day in the history of the company. We had more first-time new buyers from our own file get created because of the PayPal support. And it just left me with this feeling of such joy and pride that we took 2 years to get this thing live. It was live, and I always believed it was an enabler for transactions because it inspired so much confidence in the buyer that when a site has it, it is just more reputable by default. It's clout, if you will. Its authority just gets that much more elevated, and people trust it. And we ended up being a partner with PayPal for forever, essentially, until I'm sure they're still partners with them, but or I imagine so. But that was definitely a
Yeah.
home run.
Oh, that's very interesting, and I know that actually today it's still true. To have various payment solution on your e-commerce will lead to a higher conversion rate. If you
Yep.
only have one payment method, no payment installment solutions such as Sezzle or
Yep.
other right now it's the game. You need to be you need to provide lots of payment solutions. So that's very interesting. So now we're hearing the good stuff. What about the biggest mistake the organization made back then, and what would you say you would have? I mean, what would you do differently if you were able to do it at that time? I'd be on the rack.
I think it's a great question, and I think that for everybody out there, like, it's a knee-jerk reaction when people think about things that go wrong to, like, maybe not take full responsibility or any. In this case, I will take full responsibility for what happened at Beyond the Rack in my own capacity and the things that I could have affected. And what I netted out from that was the data behind your customer cohorts and the ways that you slice it based on whichever variables those are, can often tell a very different story. And it took us a huge amount of data analysis to get to that point. And it was almost too late when we did. And I'll really dig into that for you guys so you can understand what I'm saying. I'm not so cryptic. When you run a cohort, based on a buyer or a member, it's usually based on the first date that the person does a transaction, and then you watch the lifetime of that user's revenue per member per month, for example, based on something like a URL or an invite code or a marketing channel that they came from. So here are your Google users, here's your Facebook users, here's your XYZ users from these affiliate channels or something, and you watch their revenue per month, and you can map out their payback period, and that's fine on the aggregate at a whole. But what we didn't do, and this is why I say I take full responsibility for it, is because I should have been able to see this one coming, is I didn't slice the cohorts based on the product categories that the people were buying. So I couldn't tell you that when you introduce a new product category on the website, how does that affect the cohorts of those users? So if we started selling new merchandise, how did that affect the LTV or the cohorts of our buyers? And in one ways it might look good because you get some top line revenue on day one, but if the buyers have a lower LTV in the long term, it was actually super hard for us to detect unless we split our cohorts that way. And frankly, we didn't have the data analytical horsepower to do that at the time. And when this became apparent in the macro level cohorts that we have a problem, and I vividly remember seeing it when I was running the high level cohorts of the month-on-month retention rates, I was like, whoa, we are down on our month-on-month retention rates year over year, which just didn't make sense. And I percolated it up to the president and the CEO, and I said, guys, I think we have a problem. And it reminded me of the movie Margin Call, where one of the data analysis looks at it and says, I think we're breaking something here, like we're outside of our risk tolerances. And that's exactly what happened. And I went to the CEO and the president, I said, guys, we have a problem here. We need to figure out what's causing the problem because I don't know. And we ended up hiring a firm. At the time, it was called Datacratic, run by a bunch of incredibly intelligent mathematicians and data scientists. And we gave them all of our data in a box, and we were like, here's every single transaction, every user session, every product we ever sold for the last 7 years. Tell us what we're doing differently that's causing this erosion in our cohorts. And we paid them a ton of money, more than I'd ever given an agency for essentially 6 or 8 weeks worth of work. And they came back after 6 weeks and they said, guys, when you slice your cohorts this way, you end up with 32 different buyer types. And what has happened here is as you introduce this new merch this new product into your merchandising, it's created essentially a different behavior for your users. And we essentially brought in less designer brands at a discount. We brought in more great product that was at a discounted price, but it wasn't the same in terms of the appeal to the consumer, and it by default changed the buying pattern for those customers. And that's really what broke our initial marketing algorithm, because the CAC to LTV no longer made sense anymore. And what we did as a learning from that was we stopped selling that lower quality stuff. We started back to our roots, if you will, and selling the higher quality products at discounts, which immediately corrected that formula into the future. AOV went back up, LTV got back in line. So we did course correct, but I take it on the chin as that was something I should have caught before it was evident in the macro level cohorts. I should have been tracking that stuff earlier in a merchandising level cohort, because that would have been that would probably give me an earlier sign, maybe a few months in advance of what would have come. It would have been a pretty clear indicator. So I think the moral to that story is just customer level data and how you're looking at it needs to be thoroughly evaluated.
Yes. So you need to understand well your cohort to take good decisions, and for what I understand is that your product selection at that time changed because of your understanding, and then you went back to the original type of product to correct the situation. So that's very interesting.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. After Beyond the Rack, I heard you went to a small company called Facebook.
Yeah, another startup. Mark was a super cool guy, open arms, warm hugs. Yeah.
I guess you didn't borrow money to Mark at that time.
No, that was a completely different organization. But man, what a company!
Oh yeah.
I think when I joined, there were 16,000 people. And when I was onboarded, I was in a room with like 100 other noobs, which are like the new employees in MPK, which is like their campus. And you're in a room, and they're like, "Okay, everybody, here's the slides. Here's what's going on." And they usher in like amazing presenter after amazing presenter. Like, I didn't even know who Chris Cox was, and he's like in front, talking about like Marshall McLuhan and like the medium is the message, and like the caliber of play just went from I'm playing in like let's call it the B or C leagues, at this 300 person startup, and I've now been catapulted into like the NHL. And everybody who I look at is clearly a hitter, high functioning, and has earned their spot in this room. And I think I just started I just sponged that in. There was so many cool things that happen when you're a Facebook employee, where they're like, they have like Facebook school almost, where at the beginning of every quarter, they give you a list of courses that you could take. And there's usually like 10 or 15 courses. And they're like, do you want to be a better leader, a better speaker, better data visualization, better at like, stress management, or like, and there's just all these 15 things that you can pick, and I'm like, you just check a box. You're like, I want to learn about this, I want to learn about this, I want to learn about this, I want to learn about this. And then like, boom, in your calendar, it's like these blocks start showing up of like, you're going to learn about this stuff. And they would like, you'd be in New York where you're not even allowed to bring your laptop in the room because they want your like undivided attention for those 2 days, and learn about this, way to communicate and way to storytell or way to play your chess moves. I remember sitting in a room and we would literally watch videos of the presidents of the United States talk. And then they would pause the video and they would ask the room, what did you see him do? How did you hear the intonations in his voice or his hand gestures and things like that, so you could become a better communicator? So we literally like study these amazing speakers, because at the end of the day, these people are amazing communicators. And you take those nuggets away. And the guy who ran Canada at the time, Jordan Banks, I mean, he was the best leader I'd ever been exposed to. And I had just spent 7 years working in like, Beyond the Rack, and it was amazing. And then you meet this caliber of individual, and the way his pointed questions and his humble delivery of a harsh reality, or a poor view on something, was just so much better than I had ever seen, that I was so happy to just take it all in. And then on the flip side, I knew a lot about e-commerce. I got a PhD working at BTR. And then
Yeah, for sure.
when you put me in the room with somebody else, like, hey, here's Hopper, here's Lightspeed, here's Breather, here's Frank and Oak, here's Essence, go talk to the guys at Aldo, Reitman's, Groupe Dynamite, or Winners, or whoever it was. Like, I quickly realized that I had a skill. Like, I knew I had something, but I then started to see how other people were operating and their gaps. And I immediately connected with all of the marketers in these organizations, because they didn't see me as a sales guy. They saw me as a peer who had been doing this for the last 7 years, because that's how we rolled at the conferences. Like, we knew everybody from e-tail and shop, our order, whatever it was. Like, that's where I came. So I really fit into the role really naturally, and really I loved every one of those days, and all the colleagues that worked with me were just so high caliber. So yeah, it was an amazing experience.
So I get that your role was to help, large organizations to reach their goals on Facebook ads, etc.
Yeah.
And what have you learned from that experience? And do you think large organizations experience the same challenges that the SME does? And what would be the main, difference between those businesses in terms of, social networks and advertising?
I think one of the fundamental differences that I saw happening, I would say much less so now in 2020 than back in 2016, 17, 18. But the concept, and this is something that I firmly believe, that marketing needs to be a cash center, not a cost center. And in order for that to happen, there needs to first be a discussion between the CEO, the CFO, and the marketing human that says, these are our unit economics. This is what we're prepared to spend on marketing to create a transaction, whether that's through a straight ROAS model, through a CAC to LTV model. That marketing algorithm, the definition of success, needs to happen in order for us to start the conversation. I think at small businesses, that kind of always had to happen. At bigger businesses, there was a bit of a disconnect in terms of like, this is your fixed budget, this is all you're allowed to spend, do the best you can, versus at some small companies, this is my definition of success, spend as much as you can as long as you are within these guidelines. So from my perspective, if your company doesn't have an open to spend for your marketing department, then you're probably missing out on opportunities, because one, you don't understand the fundamentals of what success can look like from a marketing organization from a unit economics point of view, or you're simply capping out that success. And I'll give you a micro example. Let's say we have a great AdWords campaign that's running, and it's getting my ROAS objective, or it's hitting my CPA, but it's being capped daily by budget, because for whatever reason, we're not allowed to spend more than, you pick a number every month. We're just not allowed. That's the rule here. I think when that kind of thing happens, it means we're missing an opportunity. They're leaving something on the table. Most SMBs don't do that. Most SMBs get it. It's crystal clear. Marketing is, a demand center for our business, and it needs to be, run that way. Sometimes in bigger businesses, and it's not the case with all, but sometimes that just isn't the way they look at it. And I think there's a ton of opportunity for those folks to get more prescriptive around what success looks like for any given activity.
That's really interesting. And I do confirm, like, I see that in smaller businesses, because at Novatize, we do manage larger brands, but also smaller businesses, retail and brands. And I always see that when we enter into a large organization, we're always focused on budget spending and make sure we spend enough. And there's some goals to reach. But when we enter into a smaller organization, we want to make sales, and what's the ROAS, what's the LTV of the customer. So that's really relevant. That's very interesting. Let's move forward into your career. You've been also CMO at Groupe Dynamite, which is a larger retail chain across Canada, Eastern Canada, I think. You had to take part in the Dynamite's mobile app strategy. I know you talked about it a little bit when you were in Quebec at the Journée eCommerce. But I do remember that you learned things from that experience, and I would like to hear you more about it. And also, do you still think that a mobile app for a retailer is relevant in 2021?
Okay, so I'll start by saying, I was the CMO at Groupe Dynamite for about 1 year. It was an amazing experience. Andrew Lutfi is such a brilliant human being. Like I aspire to be like him in so many ways. When I grew up, I remember saying it so many times. Like I really like the Groupe Dynamite brand, and I really like what's happening at this big organization. But I loved being able to see him in action, because he worked at a low-level job at Groupe Dynamite and kind of grew up the ranks and ended up buying out the company. Like, it was his story. He gets to write a book one day, I'm sure, story. And I'll buy it. So I definitely learned a lot of how it is to work on the inside of a 7,000 or 6,000 person retail juggernaut in Canada with, several hundred stores. And I never did store visits before, but, we had this great COO, Mario, and he said, "Rich, we're going to take you on some store visits." And I was like, "What does that mean, man?" And he's like, "You'll see." And
you mean physical?
I'm like, "We're just driving somewhere?" He's like, "No, you're flying all over the place." And like, we flew to the United States, we flew to the West Coast. He was like, "You're coming to all the big stores, but you need to see it." So he kind of took me under his wing a little, and knew that I hadn't actually worked in a big retail org like this before. And I just it all started to click in terms of the omni-channel experience that, what do we need to do to make it a better omni-channel experience, or, for the customers, for the employees, for the store ops, and you kind of think about it from like a 360 point of view. So I really learned a lot working with him. The app for that business, and I don't think I can quote the actual percentages, but it's a huge percentage of their overall e-commerce revenue, and it's a huge percentage of their in-store transactions, if you will. So their loyalty program, which is something that I know Nicolas Gaudreau built before I joined Groupe Dynamite. He actually created the app, and he created the loyalty program, so I can't take any credit for that. I just kind of inherited it when I got there, and made a few tweaks to make some parts a little bit better, but it was already there when I got there. But I realized obviously how important it was for that business. And, if we talk about apps for just a sec, when I was at Beyond the Rack, and I hate to jump back like this, we launched our first apps, iOS, Android, and iPad specific apps in 2012. Like, we put the first Facebook SDK in place when the first SDK came out and was available. I was pending campaign IDs to IDFA numbers to databases in 2012. So I've seen the MAI thing go, and I always believed from that day, when apps started to percolate in the early 2010s, that apps were the wave of the future. And like, I'll say it today, like, I think, I've been saying this for 10 years, but I think in 5 to 10 years, the URL will go away, and the app ecosystem will be the only way that we move through life. And to your specific question is, do retailers need mobile apps? And I say to you, absolutely. And the reason that is because the app is essentially your portal into the brand. And it allows you to have your space within the brand. The website, the mobile website, when it lives in a browser, it is never actually yours as a user. And when you don't have that connection, lots of things become more difficult. And if you just simply count the clicks, and that's something that I always think about when you count clicks, it's like, okay, I have to open Google Chrome, I have to go to the browser, I have to start typing in the URL for something, and then something loads. Versus I open my phone and I touch the app that I want to go into. So it's like 1 click versus 3 clicks or more to just get where I want to be. And then once I'm in the app, I'm already most likely signed in, whereas on my browser, probably not signed in because, maybe I was on private or the cookie expired or something like that. Yeah. So all the functionalities that live within the app by default make the user experience better. Not to mention the fact that when you build a native app, you don't have to build it on the canvas of Chrome and Google and all the nuances that they require. You get to build it all on your own, which means you don't have to deal with their swipe left, swipe right rules. You can do whatever you want. And by default, your conversion rate should be better because your UX is better than the nuances of a browser. You get push notifications. You get real estate on someone's device, and all those things to me are like the baseline of like, okay, well, this is just the wave of the future for what e-commerce transactions are going to be for brands and for your more loyal customers specifically. If you're a one-time transaction thing, like let's say you're selling, I don't know, a tool for a fireplace, yeah, maybe you don't need a mobile app, but I'd venture to say you should still have one. On the other hand, let's say you're Groupe Dynamite, where customers come back all the time. Some of them buy almost every single month. And I could think of some other major retail brands right now that don't have an app that I shop from or that my wife shops from. And we're scratching our heads saying, I don't understand why these huge retail companies don't have apps where at least they can store my billing information, store my shipping information. So all I got to do is add to cart and do a one-click checkout or something along those lines. Like, it's just a better experience. So I'm 100% believer in apps, have been for a decade. And I think if you sell something on the internet, you should be thinking about building a mobile app, especially if there is any repeat purchases happening. If you aspire to have a strong LTV, a repeat customer coming back, you should be thinking about building an app into the future. And when we did it at BTL, I can give you a great example. Like, my cost per acquisition was lower through my MAI strategies than my web strategies, and my revenue per member was higher. So we cost less to get the customer, and the customer is worth more through that channel. So yeah,
that's really interesting. So what I do can confirm is that if yes, you have some recurring revenue from customer and you're not a one-stop transaction store, of course it does make sense. And we can also talk about all the retail experience. So when you're in store, to access the inventory in real time, to get some push, but also the Bluetooth Low Energy 4 that can provide you some special advertisement when you just walk in front of a store and just pop up to you to get your attention. I see that McDonald's does it very well when I'm just driving my car and I'm like, oh, I'm getting a notification. So that's really interesting. I'm expecting to see more apps in the future. I do align with what you said about it. Let's move to your current role at Busbud, where you're chief of marketing, so CMO. Busbud can be categorized as a travel aggregator, a market vertical that recorded a huge growth over the last years. What is the biggest challenge to reach your audience in this type of industry?
That's a great question, and I'll just start by saying that before I joined Busbud, I was pretty scared about joining the company because while I had a lot of digital history in my pedigree, I didn't have, although I worked really closely with Hopper when I was at Facebook, I didn't, and Air Canada, WestJet, Air Transit, I never actually, ran SEM for a travel company or sold a bus ticket in my life. And bus tickets are very different than airplane tickets. They're a lot less expensive. There's a tight margin. you're talking about operating in 80 different countries, not one or two. You're talking about operating in 15 different languages, not one or two. And it became a different beast. And when I was speaking with one of the founder and CEO, LP Maurice, who is an amazing entrepreneur, one of the best entrepreneurs I've had the pleasure of working with, he was like, Richard, listen, we have the most amount of bus inventory of any website on the planet. We've already aggregated it. We've created these relationships with all these suppliers. We need to figure out how to get this inventory in front of people around the world in all these different languages. And I was like, man, that sounds really hard. Like, you got, 4 million different routes and you want to promote them in 15 languages in 80 countries. And that's like, and every route is actually like 4 different keywords. It's like city A to city B, B to A and B. Like, it's just super complicated of a challenge to think about. And but I think
the price and the inventory change also. Like the pricing and the availability of the travel change every time. So lots of data.
Yeah, lots of data. So that was the challenge, and I just stuck to the principles that I've always had in my life, which is that marketing needs to be a cost center. It needs to be a cash center, not a cost center. Pardon me. And if we can understand our unit economics of these transactions at a very granular level, maybe we could build a strategy that puts us in a position where we can scale the business to, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10x the current size. And that's basically what happened. I got in there and started to work with the data scientists, started to working with the marketing team, brought on some top talent, and we started to create, more campaigns and have a very prescriptive look at the unit economics of it, and to define some really rigid attribution models, which, I'm sure defining your attribution model is always an important discussion at any business, and we did that.
Yes.
And pre-pandemic, we were on track for 100% year-on-year growth, and the company, when I arrived there, was 8 or 9 years old, and it wasn't seeing triple-digit growth. It was seeing some growth, but not to that scale. And we managed to unlock it, and the business was, really starting to grow.
That's very interesting. And what do you think? No, I'm gonna formulate it another way. In terms of web marketing, what are the best traffic sources that you have tested so far at Busbud? Have you tested also some new platforms such as I say new platform, but Snapchat, TikToks, and all to reach millennials? And because I guess for Bus Ticket, that's a large part of your audience. So have you tested things that worked well?
We've done a few tests with some of the different platforms that are out there. Unfortunately, we haven't found something that hit our objectives and seemed like we can scale. So we actually don't spend much time or money right now with some of the more innovative startup or growth platforms like TikTok or Snap or things like that. They're not currently in the mix.
Okay, that's more SEM, SEO that you're focusing on.
Facebook, Google, SEO, these are like the main driving forces in terms of the complexity of the thing that we've got to execute against. We need an ad platform that is global, that has the language capabilities, that has the tracking capabilities that we need to identify the revenues that we need to sort of track per transaction and per everything, if you will, to be able to get specific around what success looks like. So we needed a platform that's super mature at the end of the day.
Okay, I get it. And I saw that in September 2020, Busbud raised $15 million in equity funding for the Series C.
Yes.
What it was for, and how do you, as the CMO of the company, work to reach those goals, actually?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just start by saying when the pandemic happened, obviously nobody knew this was going to happen. Nobody could plan for this kind of stuff. So when you
Of
have
course.
budgets for your company, which are, what are you planning to spend? What are you planning to make for every quarter, every month? And then the pandemic happens, it really throws everything into whack. So the question becomes, okay, we now have very limited revenue because not that many people are buying bus tickets,
Of
but we
course.
still have a business to run. What are we going to do? And it was with that we're like, well, we clearly need to raise some capital in order to sort of weather this storm, because nobody knew in Q1 or Q2 of 2020 how long this is going to last. Is this a 1 month thing? Is it a 6 month thing? A 24-month thing? Nobody actually knew how long, but we knew we needed to have a war chest, if you will, of capital to weather the storm, no matter how long it was going to be. And with that, the CEO went out there and he created this round, which was, in my opinion, probably one of the most complicated and difficult fundraisings to do, because you're in the travel vertical during a pandemic. Nobody knows when it's going to end. So it's a difficult pitch, if you will, for him to do. But he managed to
Of
get the
course.
round closed based on a couple of fundamentals. One, we had some great success walking into the pandemic. So there is
Okay.
clearly upside here when the world gets back online. And two, we have the team to get this thing done if we can have the capital to buy the time that we need to continue to work on it. And that's essentially what we did. And by raising that capital, it allowed us to not change our product roadmap. It allowed us to stay the course in terms of what we want to build to make the
Okay.
business better, so that in essence we're building for recovery, so that when we get to the other side of this pandemic, whenever that is, all of the things that we know or want and the customers have told us will add value to our business, they'll be ready, or they'll have achieved that much progress along the way for that day. So, if I like to use the car analogy once in a while, and we could use the bus one if, for this example. Let's say our bus was capable of traveling at 100 miles an hour pre-pandemic with our tech stack and our infrastructure and so on. If we could do all of these changes and make all of this stuff happen, our bus will travel at 150 or 200 or 300 miles an hour. We just need the time to build these things out. And that's essentially what we've
Yep.
done. We've bought the time to continue to focus on it and continue to build this amazing product, so that when the demand returns, the bus will travel at 200 or 300 miles an hour.
Yeah, I wish you that it come back very soon. But
Thanks,
with
Phil.
the vaccine, I think it's gonna come back really soon.
I hope so too.
That was all of my my main questions. I would like to ask you, how do you, as you know, a marketing exec, how do you stay up to date about e-commerce and then digital marketing on day-to-day basis?
I think one of the first things I think I mentioned in this was my desire to learn, and how much I enjoy sponging information, whether it's through LinkedIn or joining webinars, or recently being on Clubhouse and listening to Ben Horowitz Tuesday nights and his Boss Talk podcast, or wherever it is. I look for the information wherever it is. I'll go out and make relationships with other CMOs of other companies, and ask them to mentor me in what's happening in their world, and on the other side, give it back to other CMOs at other companies. So being part of those groups, I'm part of a few Slack channels where we have like the Montreal Growth Squad or the Montreal Leadership Squad, and there's just like a bunch of executives on it who are sharing knowledge and so on. You can probe them. So the dissemination or transmission of information of what's happening is there if you put yourself out there. And I think, like I always say, when I'm in a conference, I ask, especially when I'm in front of universities, what is the most important thing that you learn when you're at school? And people, think about it a little bit. And the answer is always, in my opinion, you learn to learn. And
Yeah.
if you are good at learning, and you are capable of learning, and you continue to learn on the other side of your education, and when you're in business, if you keep that, you are going to grow from a marketing coordinator to the chief executive of whatever it is you're going to be in, and or whatever vertical, whether that's finance or any other vertical. It's your willingness to learn that will ultimately define where you're going to be and what role you're going to be in. If you don't pursue that that endless knowledge, you are likely going to stay stagnant in whatever it is you're doing in life. But it's those that continue to read. I love reading books, especially books about brilliant humans, not fiction, but biographies and autobiographies about especially technical entrepreneurs and things like that. I love doing that because for me it's my endless learning cycle.
That's very interesting. And you've actually answered my last question, and it was what would be your best advice for someone that would like to have a role like yours in the future? But learn would be the quick summary.
100%.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's always a pleasure for me to meet you and exchange with you. It's always a pleasure. Thank you again.
Thank you, Phil. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
I know you're pretty open when people have questions to reach you on LinkedIn, I guess. So if people have questions about thing you said during the podcast, feel free to reach out. I know Rich love to help others.
Thank you. Just on that one, I'll do it. So if you ask me a question, no matter what it is, I will do it. But I'm going to ask you to do something in exchange for me if you ask me a question. And that's a good deed. So if you ask me something, I'll answer it. But in exchange, I want you to go do something nice for somebody else and then send me the message and just say, I did it. And that is all the reward and all that I would ask.
Yeah, I do remember that when you did that at the conference. Yeah, that was insane. Thank you, Rich.
Thanks, Phil. Have a good one.